Hello, colleagues. I hope you're doing well today. I wanted to pick up on a conversation that got started in our discussion. The question was, what are the strengths and weaknesses of online education? I have a lot to say about that because I've been teaching in both environments since almost day one. And tangential to that first question was this question about my background. And so, just to be clear, I teach online and in the classroom. I started teaching in the classroom in 2009 at Colorado Mountain College in Leadville, Colorado. And then I quickly started teaching online one semester later. I was volunteering with this guy, Ed, who became my mentor. He been living in his Earthship in Buena Vista for the last 15 years, teaching online for a school in New Mexico. And this is how he was solving the issue of a lack of economic opportunity in Chaffee County. And in a way, that mirrors exactly what we're doing for our students when we teach online. But I'm going to talk about in the biggest punchline possible inclusive learning and teaching and use that as the framework for comparing the classroom and online in this conversation. I'm going to use this graphic that was put together by a team of teachers at a conference following the Impact Initiative, which is an initiative in the UK. The UK's Economic Social Research Council and the Department for International Development, the Joint Fund for Poverty Alleviation Research, and the Raising Learning Outcomes in Education System Research Program. So all the folks associated with those programs got together and they had this teaching and learning conference, and this panel is what they use to digest their conversations. So this is just something for you to gaze upon other than my face while I'm talking. So the punchline here is that online learning really helps us to be inclusive learners and teachers. And so let's talk about that. So what we're talking about in general is this concept that students need to know how to become a college student. They're becoming something new. And so think about at the time when you start college, there are so many changes in a person's life, and it's not just about the academics. So for a lot of students, especially our rural students, they have lived in the same town or county for almost 2 decades. They've gone to school with the same people, the same adults have talked to them throughout their lives. And there's not a lot of immigration or emigration from our rural communities. And so essentially, without trying to be prejudicial, a person grows up in a really isolated environment, and then we send them to college and ask them to learn and do so many new things all at once. And one of the most difficult things might be just interacting with people you've never met before, people who look different, speak differently, have a different perspective, all sorts of ways that a person can be challenged when interacting come to the fore in the very first conversation in a classroom discussion. Now, this is great and it's excellent, like personal development, to get to know people with whom you're unfamiliar, to hear the voices of people that you haven't heard before. But that can be extremely difficult for young people to get out of that box and then also put on new cognitive hat on. So, one of the strengths that I find in online learning is that it is just naturally more inclusive for several reasons. So, first, I just want to get into the definitions here. So, notice in the middle, they have this nice little wave. Um, and so, when we first started talking about inclusive education a couple of decades ago, we were really talking about people with physical and mental disabilities. But now, when we talk about inclusive learning, we are talking about all people. It could be socioeconomics, gender, ethnicity, intellectual capacity, physical capacity. It all it all fits into this framework of inclusive learning and teaching. And so when we define inclusive education, that definition has changed over time, so I just want to bring us all to the page. I'm talking about including everyone, not just people with particular limitations to their physical or mental capacities. So, when we think about inclusive education, what is it about the online classroom that makes it so inclusive? So there's a couple of things to think about here. We've been touring my class, and you, it sounds, have your own classrooms, and also you've been potentially in other UCCS classrooms through the CU Succeed program. What I want you to notice is that it is impossible to not be multimodal. So in the online environment, immediately we have the visual impact, we have the written word, we have a lot of multimedia resources now that are moving and have audio, and it's a very rich experience. It's in a lot of ways more rich than it is in the classroom. So my colleagues, for example, when I first started teaching at UCCS, coming from Colorado Mountain College, it's kind of like teaching at a small liberal arts college, even though it's community college, because my classes were small. So I could do whatever I wanted in my class to engage and include all of the folks in the classroom. However, at UCCS, a lot of our classes have over 100 students in them, and so there's this dogmatic approach to classroom teaching that it's the stage on the stage and a stage on the stage, and there's no other way to do it. There is no other way to communicate to 100 students in an hour and 15 minutes. I really disagree with that premise, but that is the basic framework that people are walking into, students, well, your students, when they enter a first year class at UCCS or any other large university. They their individuality, rather than being a topic of focus and personal development, it is completely ignored, right? It's like, we're not going to worry about including you. We're just going to put you in a group that's large enough that your individuality is no longer important to the mission of education. And this, of course, is not the best way to foster learning. As we mentioned yesterday, social learning facilitates cognitive development. And so, uh, basically, muddying the waters by mixing everybody together in huge, large groups and not asking them personal questions does not make people understand each other better. If we did understand each other better and we respected each other better, then we'd learn more. And I just want to stop for a moment, and some of you might be rolling your eyes because if, like me, you have a degree in science, and all I seem to be talking about in the last 2 days is the people, the socialness of teaching and learning. Um, and this largely stems from the fact that I have a master's in biology, but I have a PhD in education. And so, what I really learned in my PhD in education were these nuances of how to be an effective human being interacting with other human beings. It's not just about what science we know, but how effective we are at communicating it and relating to others. So you can, in the classroom, still engage in those inclusivity challenges, take the time, even if it seems to take a brutally long time, to let everyone have a voice very early in the classroom. And that's what I do online. So with your students, they will do exactly what you did yesterday. They'll introduce themselves for the first whole week, and they'll get started working, and hopefully I've challenged them in my early welcoming communications to find my mistakes, to ask me questions, to figure out what it is about the class that they don't understand. And so then that in itself really promotes inclusive learning, because if you have a question and I have that same question, now all of a sudden we have something in common, even though before that we didn't have anything in common. And so that's what we're doing in the beginning. A benefit, now I'm going to parlay, it's still under this umbrella, but I'm going to parlay a bit to the work itself, right? So, as I've mentioned, contrary to popular belief, it's actually easier to build a learning community online than in the classroom, because we don't have like these immediate uh, gut reactions when we walk in the classroom about who the other people are. We don't see each other, we don't hear each other speak, we don't know really anything about the physical nature of each other. So the words that we say become so important. And that's what I'm going to transition to now. My second point here is that the online environment, in my perspective, one of the biggest strengths is promoting the written word. So we live in a culture where it's fast and it's casual, and there's not a lot of time spent to really articulate our comments and communicate them in a professional and respectful way. Since we're not just gonna punt and show up to class, and maybe some people did their homework and some people didn't, in this asynchronous online environment, everyone has time to get on the same page, right? And time in itself might be a way of making your environment more inclusive. But what results, whether it takes a person 15 minutes to write a discussion post the first day the discussion opens, or the person is the last person to post right before the deadline? Hey, maybe that person, the last person, needed more time to process, right? But they were not being made a fool in the classroom when being called on, and they had nothing to say at a moment's notice. So we've got that temporal inclusivity. Also, that time allows for cultivation of the thought process. So, maybe I go in there and I flip off my post, and I can go back the next day and maybe I have new comments and I can add those comments. I can edit what I wrote if I found a mistake or want to articulate something better. So there's all this process in the online environment of like formative assessment of oneself. So you're in the discussion, you're in the class, you're working through the labs, and me as a professor, and also backed by education research, this is about a process of repetition and continuous improvement. It's a growth mindset. And so when students first make an impact in the classroom by making a post to their community or something, maybe it's not perfect right at first, but it can be perfect by the deadline. And I can model that respectful interaction to everyone in the class by guiding people in the right direction. And so that I find to be a real strength of online, that you have a longer play to carry out the perfection in the work that you are trying to demonstrate throughout the course. And of course, then we have the nature of the public forum. So another great benefit of this is peer review. So again, without any of our potential prejudices from our cultures and societies from which we came before entering college, we can give each other critical feedback. We can undergo processes of peer review that result in more learning for everybody involved, result in self-confidence building, leadership skills building, and these are all like the soft skills that any teacher hopes to promote, regardless of the subject matter at hand. Okay, and now let's keep on this path of thinking about how time is our friend in increasing the inclusive nature of our learning and teaching environments. Let's look over here on this side, the right side of the graph, okay? So we're talking about like how we need to find ways to respect all people, come to the table, include everyone, right? So which measures should we use? How do we do that? And so the first one is to instill responsibility. So I love this little graphic of the rainbow of the people. Accept individual and collective responsibility for all. So in this way, my identity and my skills are really not the most important thing. The most important thing is that I can create an effective team. And so the responsibility for learning is a collective responsibility. It is not my job to tell everybody exactly what's on the test, nor is it my job to tell everybody everything that I know or demonstrate my own knowledge. My job as a educator is to delegate that responsibility to the learner, because if they can move to a place of intrinsic motivation, then they can start to cultivate that critical thinking and learning on their own. Or maybe they can also learn how to use their professional and personal networks to solve those problems. So when we accept individual and collective responsibility, we accept it for all, then it's all of our jobs to make sure that everyone's learning. And this is one of the benefits of the wiki discussion. So, if a person in the wiki discussion is really just putting a half effort in there, their post lacks quality, then the responses lack quality, and then there's an erosion there of quality all along the communication stream. But if I have successfully, as an instructor, instilled this collective responsibility for learning, then the posts that students make, and their engagement over time, it's like we're doing this for ourselves. We're on a team. We're going to learn together, and we're not going to leave anyone in the lurch. We're not going to let any single student fall behind. And in the classroom, this can get marginalizing, right? If there's one person who's always needs to be pulled up and one person who needs more time, this extends the visual representation of their capabilities to everyone in the classroom, which can become an uncomfortable and prejudicial environment. Again, in the online environment, maybe I keep saying the same thing as a professor, but none of the students know who I'm saying it to. It is not obvious who I'm pulling up by their bootstraps. And so in this way, the online environment creates more anonymity and helps me to find a solution that matches the problem for all the students without pointing a finger at who the student is who needs the most help. And so that's another way that I find that the online environment is really supportive. I can see what the problems are, but maybe the other students can't see them. And so I'm working behind the scenes to make that equality be the guiding light in our communications, while I might be scrambling in the background to fix something for certain students. Okay. Now I think we've gone far enough. It's 18 minutes, but I wanted in this lecture to give you a sense for how you have agency, right? That online learning and classroom learning are different, but when you do both, you can see how the benefits of each could benefit the other. And so I hope that you're really thinking today about what you're doing as a teacher and how you're helping your students become college students, right? They need to understand this environment where all people deserve respect from the moment they walk in the classroom, whether it be a virtual classroom or a real classroom. They need to understand this inclusivity for success in society and in professionalism after college life. And that is really important for us to impart, although it has nothing to do with the credentials that brought us to our positions as educators. But if I could leave you with a note, it would be for you to see that your role is very important in shaping these students and understanding how to be an effective human being, and that will model the way for being a respectful learner and thinker.